Jen, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure. You know, I have mentioned your podcast so many times in my life.
Thank you.
For a couple different reasons. One, I've told people that Jen, someone I know, is a real success as an indie podcaster, like somebody that's hasn't been. It's very difficult to develop any kind of an audience these days, right?
Yeah.
Without being with big media or in some sense being connected to some kind of outlet. A lot. If you look, I mean, when we got into the game, cagey veterans that we are, right? It was the top podcasting list was full of indie podcasters, right? And that's just not the case anymore.
We were the only ones in the game. It wasn't full of. I mean, there were some celebrities like the Nerdist was in the game. What's his name? Chris Hardwick, Rogan, obviously, but like big media didn't all have a podcasting wing at that time. It was a lot of us. So yeah, I think it's hard. And I struggle sometimes when other podcasters don't want to start or like, oh, how do you do it? And I was like, I don't know, start in 2012.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry,
I don't know.
My lamp just kind of, for those of you who are listening, I just had a camera snafu. See, people that are listening don't see that, but the live streamers would have seen my camera. My camera, my iPhone is sort of clipped to a lamp, and it's all these are the indie podcaster things, right? When you don't have a studio.
Yeah. Do you edit for the audio version?
I don't in general. I mean, once in a while. I mean, if somebody, no, not really. I mean, I generally don't. So I'll just, so people will just hear that. And this is how they get to know the organic us, that they know this is real. This is not a polished show. This is organic. Just means lazy in my parlance. But there you go. So Jen, before we get into the State of the Union, which is the State of the Union is I don't know what after last night, but I'm really interested because I've talked to you before. I had you on the show before, and you have a really interesting story. You weren't always a Politico. You weren't somebody that was 12 years old. I remember in that show Family Ties, Michael J. Fox's character had a picture instead of a supermodel or something. He had a pinup of Pat Nixon in his locker.
Yeah, but I was not an Alex P. Keaton.
No, you weren't, and you were kind of a normal person, like most Americans. And then you had something happen in your life that changed that and made you intensely political. Can you say just a little bit about that?
Sure. So in 2003, I was 20 years old, and I went and studied in Germany. I did a study abroad program while I was in college. And while I was in Germany, my country started a war. And like I got there in January of 2003 and I left in May of 2003. So I saw the run up and the beginning of the war from European eyes, but more like in the European media landscape. And so like really one of the defining things for me was this is actually a perfect topic for today. It was the State of the Union in 2003. George W. Bush said these infamous 12 words, and I can't remember exactly what they were, but it was saying that Saddam Hussein was seeking uranium from Africa. And so I'm watching this on the couch with my house mother, and they go to a commercial break after it. And then the 10 o'clock news comes on, and they said, yeah, we have intelligence out of Great Britain that says that this isn't true. And so she tells me that, and we just kind of like, oh, interesting. Went on with our lives, right? So in 2006, I'm back in America. And after seeing the difference between the media there and the media here, in that like the war was taken very seriously there. Everyone was talking about it. And then I came back here and it was like none of my friends were talking about it. And when I did watch the news, it was more cheerleading than informational. So I just had a lot of questions about our media at that point. So that's what I was really studying when I came home.
And that was even the media left of center, right? I mean, famously, the New York Times. This was not there weren't many critical. In fact, I remember when Hillary Clinton was debating Bernie Sanders, she was talking about the resolution, right? And she's like, well, like one person in the Senate voted against it, and Bernie was like, I was the one, right? Like no one was against this, right?
Yeah, it was wild. And it was the reverse culture shock is what they call it when you come back from a foreign land and then see your own country in a completely different way. That was really, really, really hard for me. And so, but like, so I'm dealing with that. I finished my degree in communications, and in 2006, there was this huge scandal where Dick Cheney, the then vice president, outed a CIA agent. Her name was Valerie Plame. And the reason that he did that is because her husband, a journalist named Joe Wilson, was going to write an article that Cheney didn't want out there, basically saying that the line that Saddam Hussein was seeking uranium for Africa wasn't true. And Cheney was so desperate to have that information kept from the American public that he basically like went against this couple. And I'm sitting here going, oh my God, I've known this for 3 years. So that's when I really was like, I don't know who to trust inside this country. And so it took a long while for me to get to the point that I was like reading the congressional record and just being like, I can only trust my own eyes at this point, like primary sources. So that's kind of what I'm doing with Congressional Dish. But it was just kind of like, I was shocked by what was happening in my country. And it was scary too, because like when I was here before 2003, I didn't see it. So it's like we started this whole war in Afghanistan, and I was just like, what didn't I see? What didn't I know? Because it was just so different overseas. So yeah, and ever since then, I've just been asking questions, and every answer I get leads to 50 more questions. And so I made a career out of digging up whatever I'm looking for.
Yeah, and you don't have special training in this. You're not a political scientist. You're not. I mean, you do what any citizen could do, right? I mean, you've sort of self-taught yourself the political landscape. You watch a lot of C-SPAN. You read the congressional record. You do things that, I mean, you rely on things. You're not getting calls at 3 a.m. from Deep Throat, like from secret journalists. I mean, you're basically putting together dots that anyone could put together if they worked hard enough, right? And were deliberate enough.
I'm using public footage and public documents, and I do it from all over the world. People think I live in DC. I've never lived in DC. I never want to live in DC. Where I will say that I've had some training that allows me to do this is that with my communications major, I learned a lot about journalism, so I understand the difference between primary sources and secondary sources. And I also took a business law class in college, aced it. It was weirdly easy for me. Everybody hated that class, and it was just like nothing for me. So the legal language, for whatever reason, was never intimidating for me, but I did also get that semester of training and how to understand what I was looking at. I never expected it to be that impactful in my life. I took it as an elective, but I did have that. But that's all it took, was understanding the language and knowing how to find stuff in the congressional record. It's literally any journalist can do this. And it's infuriating to me that no one is copying what I'm doing, because it's publicly available, every single thing that I use.
And you have journalists that support your show, right? I mean, journalists lean on you at times for information they could get, right? That this is not, you don't need to develop deep undercover sources or anything. This is just stuff that any journalist could get.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish more journalists would go down my rabbit holes, but yeah, there are some people I've heard. Yeah. And there's people in Congress too that listen to the show and find out things through me. Sad, really.
Sad, very sad. Like Briney's out there, okay, and she's misinforming the country, okay. And she's got a very nasty podcast, very nasty. So, I want to get to the State of the Union in a second, but I just want to reflect for a second. I mean, your specialty. I mean, you cover all things political, but you really specialize.
It's government, not politics.
Right. Government, right? Yeah. Okay.
Let me give people the distinction.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, because I am fascinated in government. I want to know what ends up in these laws. How does it affect my pocketbook? Are you going to send any more of my friends to die in wars? Government affects our lives in very direct, tangible ways. And on top of that, in our government and Congress in particular, they're doing incredible investigations of stuff all the time, which gives me a window to the world. So it helps me understand our foreign policy better. And, there's products that I found out about that I no longer buy because of investigations that were happening in Congress. So there's just so much information there all the time. And so I am fascinated by government. Politics is different. Politics is who's going to win this next election? What is this candidate saying? What is that candidate saying?
Who's the best pollster?
What does Team Red say? What does Team Blue say? Who do we think is going to win? It's a lot of crystal ball who's going to win in the future. I am not interested in guessing what's going to happen in the future. I want to know what's happening right now and what has happened in the recent past and how it affects me. So I think one of my struggles with Congressional Dish is that people assume that it's politics, because politics, I think covering politics is easy. It's essentially gossip and guessing. What I'm doing is a lot harder. I'm digging through congressional records. I'm reading laws. I'm watching hearings and cutting out the interesting bits and giving it to my audience. Like this is hard work. And it's much more interesting to me than anything in the political realm. But I think when people see the name Congressional Dish, they just assume it's politics and they think it's going to be like icky like that. But no, it's all government with me. I tune that stuff out to the point that like when I cover a hearing, I'm pulling out all of those speeches that the politicians are doing. Like I've done entire episodes where you don't hear anything from a member of Congress. It's all witnesses, so it's like, I take it to that extreme where it's like, I don't care about your party politics. I just want to know what's happening.
No, you said something, another friend died in a war. This is part of your story, right? You lost a friend in Iraq. Not only were you experiencing the difference in reality that comes from living abroad and dialing into different news outlets and different public reaction, but you actually, this hit close to home, right?
Yeah. So the person that I lost, and I can't say that like my entire community lost Mark Daly. We lived one like housing tract over from each other. And my mom's best friend lived next door to his mom. So it's like we were kind of like, we'd play in the neighborhood. He was a year younger than me, just like the sweetest kid. If anything, like in our hockey games, he was almost too gentle. So after 9/11, when he signed up to go to the wars, I was surprised to hear that, because he wasn't a natural warrior, but he was a natural, amazing human being. And went to Afghanistan, didn't come home. And then so that's the person that we lost. But then also my best friend, he ended up serving 2 tours in Iraq. And so he came home, he's fine, but he lost people in the war, which he's still struggling with. And just those 2 tours, I was worried every single second of every single day. And so, yeah, I think as being an elder millennial, they sent our people there. And for us, I had I knew people from my high school, a couple of them didn't come home, that had signed up for the military before 9/11 because they wanted college credits. They weren't expecting to have these never ending wars launch. And so next thing you know, they're in Afghanistan like that. They didn't expect that. So for my generation, yeah, it was for any of us that knew anyone that served over there. Well, I can't say any of us, because I do know people that know the same exact story that I do that didn't seem to be affected by the war at all. So like, I don't know, but the soccer field that I grew up playing on is now named after Mark Daly. And yeah, that was a good family and he's a great person, and we're worse off for him not being here.
I'm sorry for your
Thank you.
And for every community. I mean, there's no one, I'm sure, listening to this that doesn't know someone or it wasn't connected to some loss related to those wars that you're right. I mean, we beat the Nazis in like 5 years, right?
Yeah, but we didn't send the same people over and over and over again.
Right.
And I
exactly.
think that's like when you say that everyone knew someone who was hurt by those wars, I don't think so. Those of us that are in a socioeconomic background where we're like, I mean, I'm upper middle class. So it's like upper middle class and down, we probably know someone. But these really super rich people, they don't know anyone. Their kids don't fight in these wars. Donald Trump got out of it because of like bone spurs or some kind of nonsense. So the really rich people that are making these calls and sending us to war, it's not their kids.
You should say normal people know. Like people, yeah, you're right. Normal people know the nature of this loss. Yeah, I think that's well said. Your podcast, the Congressional Dish, again, I'm a huge fan. It strikes me that the way the framers of the Constitution designed the system, Congress was where the action was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for instance, the executive branch was not. I mean, Washington kind of came up with the cabinet idea and stuff, but I mean, this is there was not this sense that the executive branch would be where the majority of governing comes from, right? Through executive orders and through in a big administrative state and stuff. Now, again, countries develop and modernity happens, but why do you think Congress is not more active as a branch of government? I mean, why? It seems like we almost are governed by a ping pong match between the executive and judicial branch, right? Well, Congress makes a lot of pronouncements and hearings, and yet that doesn't seem to be where the action is.
What I have witnessed is we have people in Congress that have been in Congress pretty much my whole life who do more politics than governing. They think their job is politics and not governing. And so they do what's best for their party. They see themselves more as members of parties as opposed to members of Congress. And so when you look at it like that, like the speech last night is such a good example of that, because what you're seeing right now is a power grab by the executive branch, because Congress, I mean, it's Article 1 of the Constitution. It's Congress that has the power of the purse, right? They set funding. The executive branch is supposed to take what Congress does and execute it. You don't get to pick and choose what gets funded. And so these cuts that are happening from the fake Department of Government Efficiency, it's not a real department. It was never created by Congress. Like, it's never been created, authorized, or funded by Congress. So like, what is this thing? So even the existence of DOGE is kind of a power grab. And then when you look what they're doing, also a power grab. And yet you had all these Republicans standing up and cheering for Elon Musk and DOGE and all of the cuts, like a bunch of trained SEALs, because it was their party that's doing it. And the Democrats will do the same exact thing. Like, they will cheer on executive order overreaches if it's their guy doing it. So it's almost like they act like the ends justify the means. But what has happened, I mean, definitely since the Bush years, because they did, I mean, that's when I started even noticing this. I don't know if it was happening before that, but definitely since the W. Bush years, I have just seen Congress give up their authority bit by bit by bit to the executive branch, because the members of Congress, they don't come together after these elections and say like, okay, we are the House, we are the Senate. They are two teams that occupy the House and Senate. It's a very different thing. And right now, I think you're seeing the results of that, where no one is standing up, and not even the Democrats. They're not really standing up for the institution of Congress in this battle between Congress and the executive branch. It's almost like they don't see that battle exists. They only see the red versus blue one. And I'm super concerned about it. But yeah, that's what I think is happening. Loyalty to party over loyalty to institution.
Yeah, this is, I have this Woodrow Wilson quote that I was I'm reading Francis Fukuyama's second book on his big 2 volumes on statehood. It's on the shelf somewhere, right? Because I want to be one of those people that's actually read Fukuyama. I talk about Fukuyama in the end of history. I've never read it, so I'm reading a little Fukuyama. But in the ellipse of the book, he has this Woodrow Wilson quote to the effect that, the Western political tradition has been kind of concerned with justice and the proper limitations of government, but not the efficiency of government. And since Wilson, right, since before, I mean, you had Jefferson say, I'm not going to enforce the Alien Sedition Act. You had Roosevelt try to pack the con. We've had these, but I mean, there is a shift with Wilson and just saying, hey, Congress is sort of passé, right? That you need a strong executive like me. And it seems like at least the 20th century is a history of executive overreach, which, as you point out, everybody's concerned about when it's the other party, not when it's their own. And now you just have, this is what happens when you have someone, right, that's a lot less scrupulous than previous people, right? Yeah. And they have all this power.
I mean, I'll give Trump this. He takes the mask off. Like, the Democrats will do the same stuff, but they lie about it. But Trump just does it and tells you exactly what he's going to do. So at least he's not pretending that, he respects Congress. Like, he straight up doesn't. So it's like, what you're dealing with, at least with him. But we've been creeping towards this for a while. We've had presidents who have been just lawless for a while. I mean, obviously we have George W. Bush, tortured people, got away with it. We have Barack Obama, drone bombed American citizens, no due process whatsoever, killed American citizens overseas, no repercussions for that at all. It's just like, we've been down this road for a while, and now it's just mask off. Now it's just obvious what's happening.
Last night, this was the longest State of the Union, I think, in modern record. An hour and 44 minutes, right?
This is lots of rambling.
This is, it's great. Lower adverbs, fewer adverbs than usual. One of the things I think is so interesting about Trump's speech patterns it's like the one day he went to class in middle school or high school was English, where they taught adverbs, because he's always like, beautifully, powerfully, very strongly, clearly, and strongly, and powerfully, and beautiful. I've just never seen a public figure or a celebrity use adverb. Everything's an adverb. Powerfully and strongly, beautiful. And then the word beautiful, too. This is such a beautiful phone call. Like, I've never in my life described a phone call as beautiful and perfect. It was a beautiful call, a perfect call.
Perfect call.
A perfect call. Okay, it was beautiful. Long speech. I mean, what did you make of it? I mean, you're somebody that thinks about policy and is kind of wonky, right? I mean, what were your reactions? Were you thinking, is any of this? I mean, a lot of it was obviously have truths and a lot of mistruths, but what were your initial reactions?
So I've actually seen Trump speak in person. I was at the Republican National Convention, and so the off-prompter rambling speech was exactly what I was expecting. A lot of that came straight from the campaign trail, so I wasn't surprised that he wanted to relive his win in the election, and he had to talk about the assassination, and like he went over all the policies that we all know he's doing. None of that was surprising to me. I was more watching the crowd to see what Congress was going to do as a reaction, because I wanted to see, is there any signs in this Republican Congress that they are going to stand up for their own power as members of Congress? And on the Republican side, it was just unanimous, standing, cheering. They're like rushing the aisle as he's walking out to tell him it was the best speech ever. And like all the women wanted kisses. Like I don't see any resistance within the Republican Party at all. So and on the same day, do you know that the Republicans were told to stop doing town halls? So it's like they, on one hand, know that we're angry about what's going on. And on the other hand, they're still cheering on Trump. So that was definitely like one thing I was looking for. And then I also just wanted to see how the Democrats were going to behave. And my husband and I both, when we woke up this morning, actually found ourselves angrier with the Democrats, because I do think that we need some kind of effective opposition to what's happening right now in Congress. And they have just been so inept, and their behavior last night was so childish. Like, this is exactly how they behaved in 2017, 2018, 2019, where it was just like resistance, like, we're not going to work with this man. But what everyone seems to have learned around the world, you see these world leaders who are like, okay, we have to deal with this guy. Let's kiss the ring and like figure out how to make it work. Right? Like, he's easily. I mean,
the prime minister, the UK prime minister was the classic example. This week I was embarrassed for him, right? When he's saying, I mean, this is unprecedented, historic, unique. I mean, a second state visit. This is a
letter from the king. It's only
from
for you.
King Charles. A second state visit. Just unparalleled. And Trump's like, well, I mean, I guess we'll come. The beautiful first lady will come to the. But it was embarrassing, right? But I wonder, like, what would have happened if Zelensky would have come in and said, I just want to say we came up with the order of the black tree, or the flaming sword. It's Ukrainian medal. No Ukrainian has ever got. It's for the most big supporter of Ukraine. I mean, that might have gone differently, right? I mean, this is sort of what you have to do.
Had he walked in and said, "We have put up a statue of Trump. It is gold. It's you next to a javelin. Thank you for the javelins." Like, that is how you get things out of this man, right? And the Democrats right now, the only power that they have leverage in certain situations. One of them is next week, because we still haven't funded the government for 2025. It was due on September 30th of 2024. It's not done. And so we have to fund the government on March 14th. This is a point of leverage that has been used by the Democrats because the Republicans, they fight with each other. And so it has been the case in the last few years that Democratic votes have been needed. That is leverage. That's when you can get some kind of protections for federal workers or veterans. Like today, they announced they're going to lay off 80,000 veterans. How's that for supporting the troops? So this is where you can get your own things inserted into law that put up some barriers to the Trump crazy. But the way that that's going to work is you have to play the game. And instead, they sat there like petulant children. And actually, it started before the speech, because with all of this, wasn't technically a State of the Union because they don't do that the first year, but we all know it's basically the same thing. So anytime you have these speeches, when the president is invited to speak, the norm is that there's a committee, and it's a bipartisan committee of people that come together from the Senate, the House, both parties, and they walk the president in. And the Democrats refused to participate in that. And so even before the speech, they made it very clear how they were going to behave. And then they sat there the whole time, including parts where you just shouldn't sit, when there's an adorable 13-year-old boy with brain cancer who then gives the hug to the Secret Service agent after he achieves his dream of becoming a secret. I mean, it was adorable. I don't like Trump at all, but it was adorable. And they're just all just sitting there. It was just such a bad
I mean, the way
vibe.
I said to a friend today, I heard somebody say this, and I said this, you don't heckle Don Rickles.
Yeah.
Right. You don't try to out insult the insult comic.
Yeah.
You can't, I mean, you're not going to out troll him. Right. So, I mean, the Democrats attempted to show up and troll him in what ways they thought were creative. You just can't win. In fact, if I were Trump, I just think, why wouldn't you just the rest of your presidency just troll? Just give speeches in Park Slope and the Mission District in San Francisco. Just run around and do trolling, because he's so good at it. So you're just not going to beat him at that game, right? When you're sitting for the cancer kid, right? I mean, I'm just saying, how do you not? What does it cost you to applaud a kid with the honorary Secret Service badge? I mean, in what universe is that good politics?
Well, so Al Green actually gave us a little glimpse into what they were trying to do. He's the guy that stood up with his cane and was waving his cane, and then got basically kicked out of the speech, which has never happened before. He's the first member of Congress to be kicked out of a speech. But when he was interviewed after that, he said, well, we know that our constituents want us to do something. So I was going to show them that we're doing something. And what they're doing is protesting. But the thing is, we can protest. Us peasants can take care of that. We can wear the weird clothes and we can hold up the signs. That's not for you. You're inside of Congress. So we want you to use your power in Congress to do something that only you in Congress can do. And for me, I would like that to be the adult in the room. Because right now I'm looking at no adults in the room. And they were not the adults in the room. And so I think that's what really upset me when I woke up this morning. I was like, oh my God, they're going to do the same exact strategy as last time, which didn't work. And the repercussions are going to be next week, we're going to get a government funding law. And as Trump said, which I actually think is accurate, he looked at the Democrats last night and said, I think they are proving, this is my fifth speech where they've behaved like this, that there is nothing I can say, nothing I can do to get these people to even smile. So he knows he can't work with them. So why bother? And that, I think, is going to hurt us, because there are things that if there were smart Democrats that were playing the game and could get some compromises, I don't think we're dealing with geniuses here. I don't think, you know, I don't think it would be that hard to manipulate Trump into doing at least a few things that aren't awful.
Well,
You know?
especially since the House majority for Republicans is so small, right? And you have such a cadre of people that have no interest in governing, right? That will vote against anything and everything. So for a lot of things, even mainstream things, let alone controversial policy initiatives, you find yourself in a place where you might need some Democrats, right?
Exactly.
So why? Yeah, exactly. Why aren't you? I mean, that it seems to me like these 2 years running up to the midterms might not need to be as much of a time in the wilderness as people are thinking it has to be, right? Because the House majority is so fragile, right?
Well, on top of that, the Democrats could actually have control of the House by the summer. Were they trying to do so? And let me explain how. So, well, so the math changed a little bit yesterday. The Democrats actually lost a seat in the House while the speech was happening because a 70-year-old Democrat from Texas died. Don't know how. He just died.
Who was that?
So his name is Sylvester Turner. Actually, he took the seat from Sheila Jackson Lee, who was 74 and died in office. He took over for her and then just died in office. So,
well, I guess you don't want that seat. I mean, that's
I know.
I said a cursed seat. This is the great makings for a horror film, right? The cursed seat.
Yeah. Well, maybe we shouldn't be replacing boomers with boomers. Like maybe get some younger blood in there. Like maybe. But even then, that's a Democratic district. So this math still works. So Republicans have 218 seats right now. Democrats have 214. There are 2 open seats in Florida. There's a special election that's happening on April 1st. These are the seats to replace Matt Gaetz and to replace one of Trump's cabinet appointments. Those are deep red districts, but we know that there are people that are upset, that are regretting their Trump votes. There are veterans that are furious. Like there is reason to believe that you could flip just about any district in this nation right now. So that's April 1st. If the Democrats were to win that, then it's 218 to 216. But Trump has nominated Elise Stefanik from New York to be the UN ambassador. If the Democrats in the Senate were smart, they would very quickly confirm her. That frees up another seat. So if the Democrats can then go and win that district in New York, then it's 217 to 17. And then if they can replace the person who just died with another Democrat, it's 218, 217. Democrats take the House. So this is an obvious play for me where it's like they're sitting there like, we have no power. We don't know what to do. And it's like, well, you have a path
and the entire
to power.
party machine, right? It's not because these are special elections. You're not deliberating about, well, how much money do we put here? What are our best TV markets? You're not recruiting candidates, right? You can just throw everything into these elections.
You could fire a money bazooka at those 2 districts for April 1st, which is exactly what I would do. And also, I know people who are willing to get on a plane and knock on doors and do whatever they have to do to get some kind of opposition. Like there's a lot of people in this country that really want to do something. And so if the Democrats were to say like, hey, do you want to come to Florida in the winter and knock on doors and feel like you're making a difference? Like, here's the 2 districts, let's go. They could win these elections if they tried, and I've heard nothing. It's because they're reliably gerrymandered Republican districts, and so they just don't even try. And so that's frustrating too. They feel like resistance is holding up stupid signs when there's actual power that is available to them that they're not even trying to get.
You're in California, right?
Right now I'm in Austin, Texas.
Oh, I thought you lived in California. Are you from California?
I move a lot. Yes, I'm from California.
All right.
I was raised in California. I went to college in California, but I move every 3 to 6 months. I'm a digital nomad. I'm a nutcase.
I like that. Keep Austin weird. Keep it weird. Because I was thinking in California, I was going to say your home state, but it's no longer your home state. But in California, they have gotten rid of gerrymandering, right? I mean, there are certain states
we do
where
independent commissions now.
Right. that seems to me to be something that could foster democratic culture. And because we've got to get back to the place where voters are picking the politicians, not politicians picking the voters, right? I mean, it's not the way the system's supposed to work, right?
Yeah. Well, and the Democrats are also well aware of that. So the last time Democrats had the House, I can't remember if they had the Senate. I can't remember, but they had a bill. It was HR1. It was their number one priority. It was a bunch of election related provisions. And some of it was like so common sense. So they had like paper ballots in there. They had independent commissions that would draw our districts. So they had a bunch of things that were really smart. And then they had a weird campaign finance idea that would give a lot of our tax money to them to run for office. And so even I was looking at that being like, don't love that one. But they passed HR1 through the House and then just said like, oh, look, we did it. And then never tried to break it up into individual pieces and continue on with the effort. So it's like, this is another frustration that I have with the Democrats, where it's like so much of what they do is performative, where it's not a real effort to make the change that they say they want to make. Because I think the reality is that in the states where the Democrats have gerrymandered the districts, I don't think they mind the gerrymandering that much. They just don't like that the Republicans have been so much more effective than they have so far. So, I've said this for a long time, but if someone likes Republican behavior and idea, they're going to vote Republican. We don't need a Republican light party. And that is really what the Democrats have been behaving like. Like they're just kind of dancing around these ideas that we want for electoral reform and, worker-friendly policies like raising the minimum wage. The reason that they said they couldn't do it when they had the House, the Senate, and President Biden is because the Senate parliamentarian ruled it like not allowed to be put in a bill. The Republicans just would have fired that parliamentarian and put someone else in who said like it would be okay. But they always just kind of like dance around doing the thing. And I think it's because they're going for the same billionaire donors that the Republicans are. Like they've sold us out, really. And so yeah, I think that if people are into Republicans, they're just going to vote for Republicans. They're not going to vote for whatever the Democrats are doing right now. And so I just don't think they're an effective opposition. And so when I woke up this morning, that was the thing that was getting to me. I was like, oh my God, there are no adults in the room. Like that's what I took away from the speech more than anything.
You did a podcast recently on the Laken Riley Act, right?
Yeah.
They talked about Laken Riley. Trump mentioned Laken Riley, right? This is
her mother and sister were in the
he loves
rafter.
that. He loves that. He loves he loves the guests. He loves the. So you did this is I think your most recent episode of the audio podcast.
So. Yeah.
This is scary legislation. Why?
It's Patriot Act level bad.
Yeah. Why do people need to be concerned about this? Because I don't hear anybody talking about it.
It's the only thing that Congress has done. They've passed exactly one law. They haven't even passed a renaming of a post office. It's just the Laken Riley Act. And what it essentially does, because the backstory is Laken Riley is a 22-year-old nursing student. She went for a jog on the University of Georgia campus. She gets attacked. She gets murdered. The guy that got convicted of murdering her was an immigrant from Venezuela. He was a illegal immigrant. But because we didn't have enough prison beds, when he was caught coming over the border, he was released because Venezuela wasn't taking any of their citizens back. And so he got released on probation. And so he had two run-ins with the law. One, he went to New York and he got stopped for riding on a scooter without a helmet. And so when Trump last night was like, oh,
I confess, Jen, I've ridden on a scooter without and you know what? I actually flipped over the handlebars and hit my head. Thank God I didn't get brain damage. Yeah, I felt so dumb.
Oh, that's so dangerous. I'm glad you're okay.
I'm glad I'm okay. I'm here talking with you. Right.
Good. Well, so last night when Trump said, they caught this guy in a sanctuary city. Like that's what they caught him for, riding on a scooter without a helmet. So they did not lock him in prison indefinitely for that. And then he moved to
Can
Atlanta.
you see Trump going, they send us their people that ride scooters without helmets, okay? They ride right over the border. The guy comes up from Venezuela. He goes up like through Panama, right? Our canal. Like, we're going to have it back. Had we had Panama, he wouldn't have done it. But he's riding up through Mexico, a bad hombre on the scooter. I mean, you could just see him saying that stuff, right?
Yeah, that's the crime that he committed in the sanctuary city. But then he moved to Georgia, where him and his brother were accused. They were arrested for stealing from a Walmart. And I don't know what they stole, but I know that they were never convicted of it. And like I've been arrested before. Arrest is an accusation.
Yeah, who hasn't been arrested? Come on, who hasn't been to a bachelor party or bachelorette party? You've been arrested. Come on.
Yeah, until you're convicted of a crime, they haven't proven that you've done it. So he was arrested for shoplifting from a Walmart, and then the Laken Riley murder happens. And so in response to that, the Republicans wrote the Laken Riley Act. And essentially what it does is it requires, because right now the Department of Homeland Security gets to make the decision of who they lock up and who they don't. The Laken Riley Act requires the Department of Homeland Security to detain immigrants that are accused or convicted of shoplifting and like a bunch of crimes that go above that, like causing bodily harm to people, like actual crimes. But the thing that I want to point out is that the Laken Riley Act, when you really boil it down, allows the government now to indefinitely detain immigrants, whether they are here legally or illegally, for being accused of crimes as minor as shoplifting $100 worth of product. And that's really dangerous stuff, because it doesn't just apply to, like, they keep saying it's criminal, illegal aliens this applies to. That is a total lie. This applies to asylum seekers. And so when you have people who are they're here legally, we have a system that allows a lot of people in. It's easy to basically use it as a 3-year visa, because we have such a long line of people that are waiting for their court date to see whether or not they qualify for asylum. And so in the meantime, they get released into the United States. That's our fault. That's our stupid system. But these people are all here legally. And if they get accused of shoplifting, we can lock them in a cage for as long as we want. It also applies to dreamers, who are people that are brought here by their parents as children, who have been raised their whole lives as Americans. They speak our language. They've gone to our schools. They're our friends. This applies to them too, because they don't have citizenship papers. And that's pretty much like the terminology they have. You either have to be nationalized or be a citizen. So anyone who's like less than citizenship, or a naturalized citizen is someone from like the territories that we have that are like citizens, but like slightly not. But yeah, there's a wide range of immigrants here who are here legally, who they can now lock up indefinitely in a cage. And so this is like Patriot Act level bad. And when I say that the Democrats are not acting like an opposition party, the Democratic senators had the votes to stop this. But instead, 11 of them voted with the Republicans. And those are the key votes needed to get it past the filibuster lining and make it law. So when I say that the Democrats are not opposing them and like this is the power you have to use way, this is exactly what I'm talking about. The one thing the Republicans have accomplished, they could not have done without the Democrats. And that's what they did.
Do you think the Democrats that supported this in the Senate are just thinking, look, this is political suicide, even though even undocumented immigrants have a much lower crime rate than natural born citizens? People don't think that way. I'm going to be, Trump's going to say, look, they're for the murders and the rapists. Okay. We're for, do you think that's the fear? It's political.
Yes.
The political backlash.
In fact, I know that that's what it was. They were looking at the politics as opposed to the policy and governing. So like I said before, there's a difference between politics and governing. Both of our Democratic senators from Georgia voted for this because Laken Riley was murdered in Georgia and the politics would look really bad. And then we also saw senators from border states where it was like, oh, to win my next election, I've got to be tough on the border. It was politics that made them decide to do that. It wasn't because I wanted to know, did these people know what was in this bill? So I went and watched the Rules Committee where they had a debate about it. And Jamie Raskin, who is a constitutional lawyer, was like, this is going to cause indefinite detention of innocent people. This is insane. We cannot do that. So there were members of the Democratic Party who were loudly sounding the alarm. And yet Democrats, both in the House and the Senate, did help the Republicans get that over the finish line.
That's remarkable.
I know. I know.
This is what happens when you watch C-SPAN.
Yeah.
Right. You can learn. You too can learn these things. Right. These are things that are accessible to every American. There's this phrase. I have heard Obama say it, but it doesn't originate with him. It's a sort of age-old adage, at least modern adage in politics, that good policy is good politics. Do you think that's true?
Only if you have people explaining what the policies are. So I think right now we have a politics and we have a media that is just so full of nonsense. There's so many people that voted for Trump because of culture war crap. They really caught on to this like anti-trans hysteria, that there's men competing in women's sports. The NCAA, and here's another thing. When you watch hearings, you learn things. The president of the NCAA testified that there's less than 10 trans people participating in college. This is not something that needs to be this big of an issue in this country. And yet there were many, many people who voted because of that, So it's like, I think that if the entire media apparatus had been explaining the Lake and Riley Act, had been explaining what it does accurately, and were saying like these are the people that voted for it and against it, and we're asking them questions about it in the halls. Like, I think if Lake and Riley was like the story, the way I feel like it should be, then good policy would be good politics and vice versa. But that's not the case. Most people don't know what that law is. And so if you don't have people explaining it to the American public and instead are like having debates about dumb things, the whole system breaks. And I think that's how we end up where we are. It's like my reality on Congressional Dish and what I'm paying attention to just feels so divorced from the national conversation. And I don't know what to do about that other than hope, I don't know, that someday people will pay attention to the same things. But it's two completely different universes right now, government and politics. And I don't know how we merge the two. But that's what needs to happen.
Who do you think are the best people in Congress? If you were going to name a couple people, senators, members of the House, that you think, oh my gosh, if we could replicate this person, if we had this kind of person, if the House was full of folks like this, the culture would be different.
I'll start on the Democratic side, although this person's not a Democrat, but like I really do think that Bernie Sanders is one of the most consistent. I think he's consistent. He has good morals. He cares about the working class. Because I think what the divide in this country is not left versus right. It is super, super rich versus the rest of us. And Bernie Sanders is very well aware of that. And so I think he's fighting the correct fight that needs to happen. And he's saying it in the correct ways. And I think we would be living in a different world if the Democratic Party hadn't rigged the election against him in 2016 and 2020. Look, I have a lifelong Democrat. I was a Bernie supporter. We were in a populist moment, and it never fails, right? The Democrat, it amazes me that, and we were in another populist moment in 2024, and our candidate, for the Democratic Party, runs around with Liz Cheney, saying the system's fundamentally not broken. It just needs tweaked. I mean, in some sense, the Democrats were the conservative status quo party in that election, right? I mean, you had Trump saying, I've got Elon here, we're going to blow it up, right? I mean, Bernie would have also blown it up in a different way, right? A different kind of, but we ran, the establishment person. He would have blown it up in a way that threatened the donor base of the corporate Democrats.
Yep.
And that's why they wouldn't let it stand, because they stand for their constituents are the shareholder class, are the rich just as much as the Republicans. So the way I see it, we have an extreme off the charts, crazy right-wing party. And then we have a classic conservative right-wing party, which is the Democrats, and the left just doesn't exist. So there is no pushback from the workers' side right now, which is why you have literal walking, talking corporations. You have Trump Inc. You have Elon Musk, which is like Starlink, Tesla, was the Boring Company. Like, he has a bunch of different companies. He's just like a walking corporation. That's why you have these billionaires that have been able to take over our government this way. And why you're not seeing the resistance from the Democratic Party. And so what I'm really looking for in the Democratic Party are the people that are going to represent me and 99% of us. There's a reason why we have this framing of the 99% and the 1%. Like that is the framing that needs to be gone forward with. So Bernie Sanders is that. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the most effective communicator they have in the House. She is excellent in hearings. She knows exactly how to get right to the point with every single one of those witnesses. She keeps her cool very well, and they have sidelined her because she also threatens corporate power. So I really like her. I think Jasmine Crockett is just fun. Like she's always just like a good time. I like the younger kids that are in the Democratic Party, and I wish the cane wielding group of Democrats would just go to their nursing homes now and let this younger generation take over, because I think there is a lot of talent there. On the Republican side, I really like Rand Paul because he is an independent thinker. Now, when he does stuff like he'll do fake filibusters, so he always caves in right at the end, but he at least says the things that need to be said. And he did a really good investigation into the origins of COVID, which is why I think now the lab leak theory is no longer like a taboo thing to say. He fought really hard to get reality out there in the world, and he took a lot of shit for it. So I like him. There's a handful of good people in there. There are, but there's a lot of bought off. There's a lot of bought off corporate servants in there that have been in there for a very long time.
What do you think? Like last night, the State of the Union. I mean, what was the most alarming stuff you heard? What was the stuff that you were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're saying this. I can't believe that people are applauding for this. I mean, or was there stuff? I mean, I'm sort of assuming there was.
Oh yeah, in the whole speech. But when it comes to Donald Trump, I don't worry too much. Well, I mean, I do worry about what he says, but I've learned to watch his actions instead of his words. The part that really has stuck with me were when he was talking about all the dead people that are collecting Social Security, because that has been debunked weeks ago. It's not true. It's because of the old tech that they use. They just put in old numbers for people. Like none of them are collecting checks. Social Security has been incredibly reliable. It's a very well-run system, and we have inspectors general to make sure of that. Like we do have professionals, and inspectors general and the government accountability office. It is their job to make sure that there's not a ton of fraud.
I think this was maybe on Medicaid figures, right? But or maybe this was Medicaid and Social Security. There, of course, is fraud. There's fraud in any system, but it's less than 1%, right? I mean, it payments that are fraudulent, that are going to duplicate payments or anything. This is. I mean, you'd spend more money tracking this down than is getting paid out
with Social Security. What will happen is they sometimes overpay the living people. So that is really what that is, but it is less than 1% of the time.
This is monopoly, bank error in your favor, right? Double Social Security check.
When you hear people say that Social Security is in trouble, it is because of the funding levels. The reason the funding levels are a problem is that there is a cap, and it is very low, that rich people have to pay into the system. So most of us pay a certain percentage of our paychecks into Social Security, and it doesn't really matter what our income is, we pay it. But if you're Elon Musk, like he was done paying for Social Security by like 6 a.m. on January 1st. And so if you just took that,
what is that? That's less than $200,000 or something, right?
I can't remember the number,
yeah,
so I think it's less than
200. Yeah, I think it's less than 200. Yeah,
it's very, very low. And so if you just made billionaires pay the same percentage that the rest of us have to pay, their financial problems at Social Security are done. But so like the issues we have with Social Security are not the administration of it. It is an incredibly efficient system. Like this is a system that is not broken. But what I am hearing is the pretext for them going in to break it. And they have wanted to do this for a very long time. The George W. Bush administration tried to privatize Social Security because essentially they want that trust fund to be in the hands of the bankers. And they want our retirement to essentially have to be the stock market so that we too are incentivized to push policies that benefit the shareholder class. So we're protecting our crumbs essentially. So this has been a long time Republican wet dream. And so that whole thing where Trump was, I don't know if he's super, super ignorant, which I can believe, or if he's lying, which I can also believe. But I know that there was a whole lot of falsities about Social Security that we've known for weeks are not true. And yet he still said it. So I do think they're coming for our Social Security, because I also know that whatever the hell Doge is, they're doing whatever they're doing to try and get a bunch of people laid off there. And the former Social Security administrator recently said that what'll happen is if you lay off people, the system will break just because the checks won't be able to be cut. Right. Like it's, and then what happens is say, well, look how broken this is. Now let's privatize it. So you can see the plan.
You know what's funny too? This is one of the things that the government is good at, right? I mean, it's not a surgical knife a lot of times. It's more of a broadsword. Government's really good at collecting money and distributing checks, right? Yeah. I mean, it's not, building a website for Obamacare. Maybe they don't have the incentive structure and the corporate culture to do that necessarily, but things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the government's really good at this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the government can do things when properly funded, and don't get me twisted. Like, there are definitely instances of waste and fraud in our government, but they have already been identified. In fact, the Government Accountability Office does something called a high risk list. They do this every 2 years where they go through the government and say, like, this is where there's the most fraud. This is where there's the most waste. Like, these are the high risk areas of our government that we really need to target in order to like save money. And that report just came out. There was a hearing about it. And in that report, like, they were talking about certain agencies that need more funding, that need more staffing, because that's what's going to make it more efficient, especially the IRS. Like, if you're worried about, our budget, this stat just blew my mind. Like, Doge right now is saying that they've saved us $55 billion, which is a bullshit stat. Like, they've tried to put the receipts out. Like, they said that they saved $8 billion on a contract, which was actually $8 million. They just like read it wrong. So it's like, these are terrible accountants. We can't believe their numbers. But their whole claim with all these cuts, they're saying they've done $55 billion. Fine. The Government Accountability Office said that in 2022, just people who didn't pay the taxes they were owed equaled $696 billion. So without changing a single thing about our tax code, if we just collected the taxes that were owed, and this is mainly from rich people, $696 billion a year. But what you need to do that is to have IRS agents. So if you were actually trying to fix our budget problems, you hire IRS agents. But Trump is firing them. So and then when you want to talk about like waste and fraud and like Medicare, the waste and fraud is in Medicare Advantage, which is privatized Medicare. Medicare Advantage is like old people who watch these commercials that say, do you like Medicare but want eyeglasses and a gym membership? Well, come over here to Medicare Advantage. And then you end up basically
for the folks that are listening to this and can't see you, you did a really nice little motion there, like selling. I would hire you to sell Medicare Advantage. You were
really
good. I could
be in that commercial. Because it is dumb.
I would have signed up right now. I was ready to sign up.
Well, I mean, they're selling something that really does make sense. Like, why do we have healthcare that doesn't include ears and eyeballs and and teeth? Like, it doesn't, those are parts of our body that should be covered. And so Medicare Advantage has figured that out. And so they sell you care for eyeballs and teeth, but then you end up in the privatized system. So you end up having your Medicare managed by a private company. So you're back in the private insurance web. And so essentially Medicare just pays them a lump sum for you, and they keep whatever they don't spend. And so what you're finding with Medicare Advantage plans is that they are incentivized to do stuff, say like, this old person has diabetes, so we need more money to cover them, even though they don't actually have diabetes, and they just pocket the difference. Like, this has been documented so many times. And so that's where the waste and fraud is. It's in the privatization of Medicare.
This is why people are not mad at Luigi. I mean, look, I'm not saying it's right. But this is why there are no tears shed for Luigi, right? I mean, because do you know there was a woman that was sending him money, putting money on his books in jail. And when she found out he was only 5'7", she stopped.
Is he tiny?
Oh my God, it was you. You're the next woman that's going to cut the funding. He's tiny. He's tiny.
No,
Women don't
that.
like, it's very difficult. Women are very tough. I'm only like 5'8.5", and it's brutal. I always tell women.
I'm 5'11".
Ugh.
So I look silly if I'm dating someone. I don't know. Maybe I could do it. I don't know. But
I always
feel
tell
huge.
women I'm 5'8.5", but I'm 5'11" in heels.
There you go.
So, that's how I market myself. Well, so was there any, what do you think? Trump kind of laid out an agenda last night. A big, bold, and beautiful agenda. This beautiful text guy. I love the word beautiful. It's so fantastic.
I know.
But what role will Congress play going forward? What role is there for Congress going forward? How will Congress go? What will the congressional interaction look like moving forward here?
The truth is, I don't know. Because if we're now at a point where Congress can set the funding levels as they're constitutionally required to do, but then the president is free to ignore them and do whatever he wants. If we're now at a point
this is the impoundment issue, right? That's now on people's radar. If you're in the weeds, right? It's called impoundment, right? Where Congress appropriates the money and designates it to be spent, and the executive branch just says, we're not spending it.
Yes, but it's bigger than that. Because let's take USAID, for example. This is an agency that has been created by, funded, and authorized by Congress. And they went and destroyed it. Somehow, and I still don't understand the mechanisms of this because Congress is not investigating it. But they somehow went in there, fired everyone, took the USAID sign off the front of the building. That's how much it doesn't exist right now. If that is able to stand, then what is the point of Congress doing the funding at all and allocating funding if the executive branch is just now going to be able to destroy agencies, create a bullshit department out of nowhere? Doge is not real. Doge is a renaming of the agency that did the Obamacare exchanges. An agency does not have the ability to do oversight over any department. An agency is a subset of a department. So the idea that this agency is going to departments and laying off their staff, what is happening? And so what is Congress's role at this point? They seem to be attempting to break the constitutional balance of powers. And without Congress fighting back, because Republicans only care about being Republicans and don't care because it's a Republican doing all this, I genuinely don't know. I was looking at the budget outline the other day and I'm like, am I wasting my time? I genuinely don't know. This is unprecedented.
Yeah, that's interesting. The existential question, right? Because your biz, what you do in the podcast, and again, do it so well. I tell people about you all the time. It's no one does what she does. But you're a congressional weedy person, right? And maybe there won't be much work of Congress, right? This is sort of, are you going extinct here or what? Is the show going extinct?
No, because I'm watching Congress right now and they're behaving like things are just normal. And so I think they're going to go through the motions. They're going through the motions right now. They're doing the budget guidelines. They do have to fund the government. The shutdown will be very real next week if they don't. So they still have to approve the money going out, but it's more of the details of it. So it's they can push the money to the executive branch, but will they actually have the power the way they're supposed to say okay, this much goes to this department, this much goes to this department, this is your job. That's all supposed to be done by Congress. What we're seeing right now is an executive branch just being that's what Congress says, but it doesn't matter. We're going to do what we want. That has to be fought back against. And I don't see it fought back against. So what I'm wondering is, are we stepping into a world where Congress goes through the motions, but in reality, they just kind of write the big check and the executive branch does whatever it wants? So,
this is where some people call it a constitutional crisis and use language like that. But right, it seems to me, I'm not a constitutional scholar. I don't even play one on TV. But it seems to me that the president can just go in and say, all right, I'm going to, I love on Saturday Night Live, Elon comes in, this is my assistant, and it's this 20-year-old kid named Big Balls. We call him Big Balls. And Trump's like, I like Big Balls, right? But, I mean, Trump can just fill up the administrative state with, 22-year-old Elon disciples if he wants, right? Because largely he has a lot of plenary power over that part of the government. But he does. I mean, the impoundment thing is this is the hairy stuff, right? At what degree? And what do you think that? I mean, this is the question, right? Does the Supreme Court? My sense is the Supreme Court, this court, will hold up the unitary executive kind of, hey, he can do whatever he wants with regard to the administrative state. Will they push back though when he transcends, when he steps on the toes of other branches? I guess is the question.
It happened today. Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice Roberts sided with the liberals in a case that Trump just lost. So the Supreme Court is already proving that they are not going to be completely loyal to Trump, because that is when people say we're in a constitutional crisis, I hesitate to say that. I am deeply concerned, obviously, with what's happening to congressional power, but we still do have the courts, which at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to decide this. Like even Congress, for some of these things, it should be Congress suing the executive branch. Like, I don't really know how that would work, but like, I do know that the courts are where a lot of this is going to stop, and it's already happened. But the problem is it takes a little while, and we're only like, I know it feels like it's been years already. We're only 50 days into
exactly.
Into this
it feels it's like in dog years, right? Like 1 month of the Trump administration is 22 months of a normal.
Yeah. So like, here's a little bit of hope for you. So the Office of Personnel Management, a lot of these firing emails have been going through the Office of Personnel Management, which is an agency in the executive branch. They do not have authority over other departments. And so they were sued over these mass firings. And the judge, oh my God, the judge's quote was great. He said something along the lines of, never in the history of the universe has the OPM had the ability or had the right to fire people in other departments. It was just like, no, you can't do this. And so those agencies are now quickly rehiring the people that were fired. And then the OPM went and adjusted their original memo to say, oh, by the way, these are just suggestions. Like we're asking you to make these cuts. So it's beginning to get rolled back through the courts. The courts are doing their work. It's just these last 4 weeks, it came very quickly and the courts needed time. So I don't see us in a constitutional crisis just yet, because I am seeing the courts work all the way up to the Supreme Court. So that is where we have some good news here. Our system, we have a lot of comparisons right now that like we're Germany in the 1930s and like, we're headed down that road. Our system of government is older. We have more checks and balances. Like our system is being tested, but right now I'm seeing our system hold. Even though I've named a lot of like problems, our system is still holding as of right now.
If you had, you're someone that covers in the weeds, the sort of on the ground workings of Congress. What's your fantasy legislation? What do you wish? Like, oh my gosh, why doesn't Congress get together and do this? I mean, what do you wish? What's something that they could do that actually, legislating actually doable that you think if they did would be really salutary for the country?
I think the nucleus of all these problems that branch out of it is the ability to legally bribe members of Congress. I think that needs to stop, because I understand why the Democrats have become what they have, because they say if they don't take corporate and billionaire money that they are unilaterally disarming, because they're going against the Republicans who just shamelessly take that money. So it's like, how do we raise the same amount of money? And the whole conversation is about money. Like whenever you talk about elections, it's like, well, how am I going to raise the money? It shouldn't be about that. So I think the number one thing that we should demand as voters, if we want to actually fix this system, is to make bribery of politicians illegal, whatever that looks like. There are experts far more qualified than me to actually craft what that would look like. And they've been doing that work for years. But I think that is the number one problem that we have to take care of, because when the incentive is gone to do the bidding of the rich, then the rest of us have a chance to be heard. Like our politicians are not listening to their, every district has about 700,000 constituents, but there's only like a small group of very, very rich people that are really being heard by these people, because they want the checks to be cut to the party and to the individuals. And that's our main problem. So that's my dream legislation, is whatever it takes to make bribery in our politics illegal. I think campaign contributions are bribery.
So this is where the reforms would flow from. If you could get rid of this big reform, if you could do this big reform where the moneyed interests weren't able to just bribe legislators, then you think a lot of good government that maybe policies would rise or fall on the merits of the idea, not on the size of the pocketbook of the lobbyists.
It's that, and also the people that you could put into Congress wouldn't necessarily be the people that are the best at kissing rich ass, because that's what you get now. Like, the job doesn't match the job application. The job is acting on behalf of the people, but the application is who can be the biggest kiss ass. And it's like, we have to make those two look more similar. So it's like, if I had my dream system for how we would run an election, I would have the elections be 6 weeks. And in those 6 weeks, if you collect a certain number of signatures within your district, you're in the game. If you're in the game, you get the same amount of money as everyone else. And then we get to see who manages it the best. So maybe one candidate decides to go all in on TV ads. Maybe another candidate decides to use their money to buy pizza parties for people that knock on doors. Maybe another candidate decides to go all in on podcasting. I don't know. But they all get the same amount of money. And then we get to see how they manage it and how they manage their personnel. That, for me, would tell me a lot more about managing things, which I think is a better job application than who can raise the most money from billionaires. That's how I would do it. And we can afford it. We're rich enough to be able to afford it. I would pay, an extra $5 a year in my taxes to fund campaigns that would be even playing fields like that.
Jen, you've really blessed the listeners with a lot of great information, and your perspective is so wonderful, because you do work that not even journalists do. I'm so grateful. How do our listeners, you're doing something weekly now, right? Which for just pennies, right? I mean, just a little bit of Venmo cash. Can you just, before you go, can you tell us the new project that you're doing weekly? Because your audio episodes are deep dives, a little more episodic. You're now doing weekly coverage, right?
Yeah, because so the public feed for Congressional Dish are my deep dives. So I'm reading laws, I'm watching hearings. Like the Lake and Riley Act episode is an hour long. You get to hear highlights from a hearing and the details of the law. Like, they're very research intensive. I give you all my sources. Like, they're not necessarily scripted, but I'm very careful with my words. And so that's what's on the public feed. And then I found that because I'm constantly doing deep dives, that I was getting behind on what was happening in the now. So for my Patreon members, what I'm doing is every Monday or Tuesday, I do something called Last Week in Congress, where I take the summary of the congressional record from the last week, which actually gives you a ton of information. It tells you what bills were worked on, what amendments passed, what amendments failed, what hearings happened, what weird days have been declared, like today's public school day, and like what emergencies are being extended. You get so much information in them. And so I basically take those pieces of paper and I tell people what happened, and I just it's way off the cuff. I don't script anything. I'll give you information off the top of my head. I'll tell you stories about, I remember Kelly Loeffler. I think that she's now the small business administrator, but I remember her from when she ran for Congress, and like, she's married to the guy he's the CEO of the company that owns the New York Stock Exchange. So it's like, oh yeah, she's the small business lady. She's perfect for that. So it's just like, that's the type of commentary that I'm doing. And so sometimes they're 15 minutes, sometimes they're an hour and 15 minutes. It's just, I tell you what happened last week in Congress. And so that's because they're off the cuff and not fact checked. Like I might say trillion instead of billion. Like, I don't know. But that's what I'm doing for not only for my patrons, but also for me, because it's helping me stay current and know what's going on while I'm doing the deep dive.
What's the sticker price on that?
So right now, the way I have my Patreon set up, we ask for $5 per public episode, and I do 2 public episodes a month. So it's $10 a month.
That's a deal. It's a steal. What if do you do sliding scale? What if somebody comes to you and says, I'm a college student and I'm really struggling?
So, I mean, and that's the other thing too. Like if you donate through Venmo or PayPal, like Patreon is making me change my entire funding model. So everything is up in the air right now. That's why I'm like hesitant to like, we have to change everything. I think right now on Patreon, if you don't want to pay $5 an episode, I'm pretty sure you can still adjust it to whatever you want to pay.
This is amazing.
Yeah. And I do have
everybody
a very
should
rich private feed.
Get on the
Email
Patreon.
me.
Get on the website, email her.
I have people that pay through Venmo, and I just kind of know that they're going to keep paying, and so I just give them a private feed. I'm very liberal with my private feed. Just pay me something.
It's as Trump would say, it's a beautiful podcast. It's wonderful. It's fantastic. Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much for all the work you do and for spending some time with me talking about it.
I always love talking to you. Thank you again for having me.